that we invite Senator Menendez to join us for lunch to provide us a briefing and some perspective from his view as to what are the national priorities, what are the things that are happening in D.C. that we should be paying attention to. More importantly, how do we become more actively engaged in making certain that the agenda that we are promoting through our institutions and organizations to improve the quality of life for the people of New Jersey are brought forward and connected with. He's not a stranger to anyone here. Some of us know him from his time as mayor in Union City. Others of us know him from his time serving in the state legislature. Some of us know and interacted with him as he moved into the halls of Congress and ascended to the U.S. Senate. Every step of the way, we remember that he understands the nature of struggle. He understands and communicates clearly the urgency of now. Senator Robert Menendez, the last time I think we're here, we were talking about the proposed revitalization or stimulus act, okay, and there was discussion about, I think you had just become a member of the very important budget committee, and Ron Tuff and folks from the Community Action Agency said, you know, in the budget there's a discussion about making some more money available for weatherization and energy conservation, and the community action agencies were going to be in the center of that. But one of the problems was a capacity thing. There was some need for some training considerations, and we were able to communicate that to you. And when the bill was passed, that piece was there. That's how government is supposed to work. That's how elected representatives at all levels of government are. The opportunity we have. Every idea we have is not a good one. Every idea he may support, he may not be able to get through the halls of Congress. But the important thing is that he's willing to listen. His door is always open. And it's my pleasure to present, not introduce, because we all know him, our U.S. Senator Robert Menendez.
Well, thank you very much, Jerry, for your gracious introduction, for your leadership as the chair, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here again, as I have been several years, and to share some thoughts, and then also to listen to you and have some feedback as well as some ideas, which we have often been able to put into action and or try to incorporate legislatively. You know, when I think about the times that we are in, and let me just recognize all of your leadership, and I know that the Assemblywoman is soon to ascend to the chairmanship, so congratulations to you, and continuing a great tradition of service, and to all your other officers as well. I think about these times, and I say to myself, we are living the Chinese curse. May you live in interesting times, and I would add challenging. We are challenged both at home and abroad, and those challenges are sometimes magnified, particularly for communities of color. And obviously, I never forget my starting point in a discussion of what we are doing today is always framed by where we came from. And I always like to start, when I haven't had a universe in which I've discussed this, is 2008, which is relatively recent history, but people have short memories. It was 2008, in September of 2008, where I got called to a meeting with the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Ben Bernanke, and the Secretary of the Treasury under President Bush, Secretary Paulson. And the reason I was called to it as a member of the Banking Committee and members of the Senate leadership, in which they outlined a series of financial institutions that were on the verge of collapse. And they say if they collapse, they'll create systemic risk to the entire country's economy, and every American will feel the consequences of it. And the room was pretty hushed. And then the question and answer session came, and I got to ask one of the first questions, and I said to Chairman Bernanke, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, you know, the essence, the central bank of our country, I said, Mr. Chairman, surely you must have enough monetary tools at the Federal Reserve to get us through this period of time, because what you're asking us to do in terms of the scope and size and immediacy to respond to the crisis is unprecedented. And he looked at me and he said the most chilling thing I've heard in 38 years of public service. He said, Senator, with all due respect, if you and your colleagues don't act in the next 2 weeks, we will have, his words, not mine, a global financial meltdown. And the room went, what? And I said, a global financial meltdown, that would mean a new depression. And he said, if we allow it to happen, that's what it will mean. Markets will pancake across the globe. There'll be a run of the banks, and we'll have a depression far beyond what the nation lived under Roosevelt. Now, whatever you may think about Chairman Bernanke's economic policies, the one thing you have to know about him is PhD is in Depression-era economics, how the nation got into the last depression, what worked and didn't work in terms of getting us out of it. So when he said this, it had a lot of impact and power behind it. And hence, we had to respond to that crisis to avoid the entire nation going not into the Great Recession that we often hear talked about, but a near depression. And I think it's important to know that because that is September of 2008, before we had an election in November of 2008, before Barack Obama was elected President of the United States, before he took the oath of office in January of 2009, before he could put a cabinet together in February of 2009, and before he could send a program of economic stimulus to the country in March of 2009. And what happened is that we had lost millions of jobs already in 2008. People forget that when he took the oath of office after President Bush, unemployment was already then at 7.5%. And in the first quarter of 2009, before he could even act, 2.1 million more jobs were lost, having nothing to do with his policies. The GDP, the gross domestic product of our country, was in negative range. And of course, we were at high unemployment levels. So I think it is important to recognize that because the nation, which is clearly feeling the challenges, and why did this all happen? It happened because we had 10 years of tax cuts unpaid for the wealthiest people in the country. We had 2 wars in Iraq and Afghanistan unpaid for, all on a credit card towards the next generation's commitment to a commitment by the government to put on the next generation of Americans the entire burden because they put it on a credit card mentality, didn't pay for anything in Iraq and Afghanistan. We had a market that instead of, I believe in a free market, but there's a difference between a free market and a free-for-all market. And what we had was a free-for-all market where excesses of large companies and decisions they made became the collective risk of all of us. Now, I'm for any entrepreneur who wants to take a commitment, take their money, take an investment, and I'm hoping for them that they do well. But when they do poorly, I don't want their decisions to become the collective risk of all of us. And that's exactly what happened. All of this came together in 2008. So when we look at today, a little over 3 years later, we have to think about where we started and understand that we are now at a point, instead of negative growth in our economy, we have positive growth in our economy. Instead of millions of jobs being lost, 22 consecutive months of private sector job growth, 3 million jobs since, in fact, those moments of the first quarter of 2009. Is it enough? Absolutely not. Do we need to do more? Absolutely yes. Do we need to try to find ways to make this economy grow more robustly? Absolutely yes. But when you are at the point of a near depression, to end up saving the country from not going into a depression and going into positive territory, credit has to be given, and that credit never seems to go to this president or those who have worked with him. And so I think that's an important starting point. Having said that, I also think that as someone who personally voted against the war in Iraq in the first place when I was in the House, which was a war that we should have never sent our sons and daughters to, or send the national treasure of the United States, I am proud that at least this president has brought all of our men and women out of Iraq as a result of that. So, and beginning to brought 10,000 of our troops back from Afghanistan. More will come through by the end of this year. So we are moving in all of these elements in the right direction. But there is still the fierce urgency of now, because there are still too many of our people who are unemployed, for which they are desperate in terms of their lives. And one of the things that as I travel the state and listen to so many individuals, many who come up to me and say, Senator, this is the first time in my life that I have been unemployed. And there is a tear in their eyes. And not only is there an economic challenge to them in their lives in the present, but something bigger has happened, which is a problem, which is that fundamental social contract in America. Some people call it the American dream, that if I prepare myself, work hard, and sacrifice, I get ahead in the dreams and hopes and aspirations of my children, I realize has been shaken to the core. They're not so sure that that promise, that dream is a reality. And so this is part of our challenge to overcome. So what are we doing in this regard? We're trying to do, within the context of incredible obstruction, and I do want to just create that other framework before I get to the specifics of what we're doing, what we have done and what we are trying to do. Now, I have never seen in 20 years in the Congress between the House and the Senate greater obstruction than what this president faces. You know, the high watermark of the use of the filibuster in the United States Senate, which is a procedure in which one senator can get up and say, I object to something moving forward. And if they object, they continue to object, there's only one way to overcome that senator's objection. You have to get 60, not 51. You know, I grew up learning majority is half plus one. Well, not in the Senate. In the Senate, if one person wants to object, you need 60 votes. And of course, those who are allied with the president are only 53. So the bottom line is the high watermark of the use of the filibuster in the Senate was when Southern senators, in the midst of trying to fight civil rights legislation, where they used to meet around a table in the Senate dining room and call it the cornerstone of the Confederacy, used the filibuster 25 times. Does anybody have a sense of how many times our Republican colleagues have used the filibuster in the last 2 years of the Congress? 180 times. 180 times. On things large and things small. Why? Because Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader of the Senate, says it is my #1 priority to make Barack Obama a one-term president. And then he effectuates that view by using on his side the filibuster so that no progress can be made. And when no progress can be made, of course, the American people are unhappy. And they cast a broad, blanket of blame. But we have not used the filibuster on our side to stop the president's policies. And so this is a challenge. And then, of course, along came a new majority in the House of Representatives, fueled by an incredibly ultra-conservative view among the Tea Party elements of 60 new members, all within the Republican caucus, that want to govern by ideology and are rigid in a way in which they will not let negotiation or compromise be achieved. So it is against this background. I understand very often the frustration of the voices I hear, but it is against this background that we are working, and so we need partners for progress, not individuals who have used the rules to impede progress in the country. Having said that, there are some things that we have still been able to achieve. When I think, education, I understand growing up poor in a tenement in New Jersey, the first in my family to go to college, that I would never be one of 100 United States senators in a country of 308 million people, but for the education I was able to achieve. And that education was able to be achieved by public schools and Pell and Perkins grants and work-study loans. And so we need to make sure that that is a continuing reality for future generations of Americans. We need to make sure that before you get to college, however, you have the foundation so that when you apply, you can achieve access and then success in college. And that's why one of the things that, I would call to your attention is the reauthorization of the famous Leave No Child Behind legislation, which I think left too many children behind at the end of the day. And so we all believe in high standards and accountability for our children. Given the right set of resources and the right educators, any child can achieve their God-given potential and excel. But you have to have the resources and the right ability and environment to be able to achieve those God-given abilities. And so this reauthorization, how it takes place, is going to be very important about our communities and their ability to progress. It is why, one of the legislation that I helped pass was $268 million at a time that we were laying off teachers and creating greater classroom size to try to prevent a significant part of that layoff. It is why I have been one of the architects of changing all of the financial assistance from private-based institutions to direct government lending to those students so that at the end of the day we would dramatically increase the pot and reduce the costs. Because too many of our kids who do make it end up with a mountain of debt after they graduate and not the ability to pay it off. That has to be changed. And if you listen to the President's State of the Union speech, he has some new initiatives which I think will be very good if we can get passed in this Congress to try to deal with that. If you talk about economic opportunity, certainly part of my focus every day when I go to work is how do we grow this economy? How do we get people back to work, whether as a member of the Senate Finance Committee that deals with all tax policy, all trade policy, and anything that needs a revenue source for the federal government, or as a member of the Senate Banking Committee, which has all of our financial institutions and all of the regulatory agencies that deal with those financial institutions, where I chair the Senate Subcommittee on Housing, Mass Transit, and Urban Affairs, is how do we get people back to work? How do we get the financial institutions that we helped save in 2008 to now get responsible lending to take place in our communities? Because I have a lot of businesses who come up to me and say, Senator, even in this economy, I can grow my business, but I can't get the access to capital to be able to do that unless I want to pay 12 points over LIBOR and give my firstborn as collateral. And by then, it's not worth it to get the loan anyhow. And so one of the things that we did is dramatically increase the Small Business Administration lending and eliminated a lot of the red tape that used to make it undesirable to pursue an SBA loan. And within that context, I have a provision that soon will be rolled out where I included $1 billion for Community Development Financial Institutions, CDFIs. Those are agencies that entities that make investment, particularly in underserved communities. And it will give the full faith and credit of the United States to back CDFIs in lending into our communities in a way that can help growth to take place of businesses and, of course, the hiring of individuals. It's why, as the Housing Subcommittee Chair, I have been pushing very hard to change both the foreclosure process, to give more families the opportunity to still sustain their home, to allow refinancing, particularly in FHA and mortgages backed by the two federal entities, Fannie and Freddie, that do not allow people to refinance at the lower rates today that could make them responsible borrowers and save thousands of dollars at the end of the day, and I think have a ripple effect, a positive ripple effect in the economy. It is why I have taken the mortgage servicers to task at 2 hearings that have now produced part of the Attorney General's across the country suit against these mortgage servicers because many of them ultimately undermined the rights of individuals who own homes. It is why I am introducing legislation next week on shared appreciation mortgages so that we can get individuals who are underwater get their loan rates reduced, their original, amounts of their mortgages reduced in return for saying, well, if my property goes back up in value, in return for reducing significantly a part of my mortgage, I'll give you part of the appreciation back when I sell it. All ways to try to find how do we stabilize this housing market, how do we get more people to be able to keep their homes. Finally, I know that law and public safety is a big issue for the BIC, and I just want to say in one context why this election, among so many reasons, is so important. The next president of the United States is going to have several Supreme Court nominations. Several Supreme Court nominations. Now, if you look at what this Supreme Court has been doing, as it's presently constituted, it continuously rolls the clock back on us in a variety of ways. Maybe not even ways we might all agree in terms of our priorities, but on a woman's right to choose, on a whole host of things, it continuously contracts it. And we've come a long way in this country from a time in which a black person was not even considered a person to saying that corporations are now people. It's pretty amazing, you know. But in the case of Citizens United, the Supreme Court decided that a corporation has the same right as a person under the First Amendment of the United States, and overturned 30 years of federal law saying that corporations could not take their money and invest in a federal campaign unlimitedly. And that has resulted, you've been watching the Republican elections, what's been happening. Believe me, that's only the tip of the iceberg. To these super PACs in which unlimited amounts of corporate money, without even knowing who's giving it, is now the reality of the political landscape. And obviously, that will overwhelmingly support one universe, those who have corporate interests, and obviously they don't spend that money because they just want to spend their money. They spend their money because they want to support those who advocate their policies. And while I have nothing against corporations per se, their effort is to improve their bottom line and to make more money. It is not a societal effort of improving everybody's status in life in this country. And so this is probably the worst Supreme Court decision I have seen that corrodes the democracy of our country. And just to give you a sense of how big this is, in 2010, when I was the chairman of the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, the committee responsible for trying to have Democrats keep a majority in the Senate, that was the year the Supreme Court made this decision. In less than 1 year, just against Senate Democrats alone, $70 million was spent just against Senate Democrats alone. I don't even know how much was spent against House Democrats alone by corporate entities. Now, that will be the tip of the iceberg in a presidential year. And so the Supreme Court made that decision. The Supreme Court is consistently making decisions on voting rights issues. The Supreme Court is making decisions on a woman's right to choose. The Supreme Court is the ultimate arbitrator of what is the law of the land. And we may be free to disagree with it, but we are not ultimately free to disobey it. And so the challenge is we have to live under its decisions. And where there are going to be several nominees that there will be that the next president puts there, for those who have struggled and to create a different America, rolling the clock back is a real possibility if the wrong people get into the Supreme Court. That is one of many reasons. Do we want to move forward or go back to the very policies that brought us into the mess that we have been in? Do we want to see the adventurism abroad that sends our sons and daughters and their lives in trillions of dollars? Or do we want a policy in which the world is the United States is more respected in the world today as a result of this administration and this work? And finally, you know, I never forget that Rosa Parks sat so that Martin could march, so that Barack could run. And I see a set of circumstances in which across the landscape of this nation, voting rights are constantly under attack, and they are moved in a direction to make it more and more difficult for people to be able to exercise their franchise. And that is a serious, serious challenge. So I wish I could come and paint a happier picture. But I think understanding the truth of what is happening is incredibly important, and the challenges that happen as well. Having said all of that, you know, I will just close on this note. I look and I say we are bringing our sons and daughters back from war and stop spending trillions of dollars. We are moving in the right direction with the private sector growing, and they're the ones who are ultimately going to employ us. We are moving in the right direction with overall growth in the economy. We are moving in the right direction where in 2 more years, when the health care law takes fully into effect, no longer can a child born at birth with a birth defect ever be said you can't have insurance for the rest of your life because you have a pre-existing condition. No longer can a man who had a heart attack on the job tell you're never going to get insurance again because you have a pre-existing condition. No longer will a woman who was paying double, in many cases, the premiums of a man in the same age group just simply because she was a woman going to be considered a pre-existing condition. No longer will most Americans and 1.5 million New Jerseyans, many of color, who have no insurance whatsoever, will be able to go to sleep at night and say, I can get access to insurance. All of that, landmark legislation created by this president. No longer is equal pay for equal work a slogan. It is now the law of the land signed by this president under the Lilly-Ledbetter bill. No longer are we in a position in which the access to capital is simply still a struggle, but is moved dramatically in a different direction in terms of what we are achieving in those CDFI, SBA loans, and other efforts that the government is taking. You know, I know that people talk about the security of the country. Well, there's only one president who can say that he got bin Laden, al-Zawahiri, and Gaddafi. And if it was some other president, we'd be marching in the streets in parades. So the nation is more secure today. So I look at every single dimension. So I see a rising sun, not a setting sun. And I think about this country, and I think about our challenges and our struggles, but I also think about what we've achieved. It's a country who sent its sons and daughters to beat fascism and Nazism in 2 world wars and 1. It's a country that put a man on the moon and created a scientific and technological revolution and changed the nation for the better and led the world, still does. It's a country that looked at diseases that were once thought to be incurable and cured them. It's a country that faced its original sin and race and ultimately has largely overcome it, although there's still much to do. So it is a country that is dynamic. It is a country that meets its challenges. It is a country that I think has every opportunity to continue to prosper in the days ahead. The question is, who will lead us there? And that is the decision we all as Americans have to make in just a few short months. So I appreciate the BIC's engagement in a very substantive way with the leadership of the community, thinking about these and other issues. And I appreciate, as always, the opportunity to come and share with you both some insights as to what is our reality, what is our work, and I look forward to continuing to work with you for so long as I'm a United States Senator. Thank you very much, Jerry, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Sure. You have time for 2 questions?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So I'm going to take a few questions. Let's get the Senator.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great summation of the situation. We didn't have as much time